Hello and welcome to this quick tutorial. I'm going to demonstrate how to begin my pattern for Honeycomb Placemats, available as part of an ebook on Ravelry or as a single pattern from my website, loveapplecrafts.com. A very quick note on materials. I'm using cotton pure from Pearl Soho, for which the recommended hook size is 3.75, so I have a double-ended hook, a 4mm on one end and a 3.5 on the other. That's the kind of weird stuff you can get away with these patterns. They're very flexible. So as usual, we're going to start with a slip knot and make a foundation chain. It is important when you're making this chain that you count exactly and chain exactly 32 times. Please disregard as we go here the black discoloration on my hands. I was working with black mulch 5 days ago and it does not come off. So once you have 32 chains, you're going to identify the second back bump from the hook of that chain. Once you've identified it, insert the hook into it, yarn over, and pull up a loop, which I've abbreviated as PUL. Then yarn over, insert into that same second back bump again, and pull up another loop. Next, you're simply going to insert into each back bump, pull up a loop all the way down the line. You're going to do that 29 times, which should take you to the second last back bump of your chain if you in fact do it 29 times. So you can count or you can just keep going until you have one back bump left. If you've worked your chain a little tight, this can be tricky. I find it awkward. I don't enjoy this. My chains are always a completely variable tension. Some of them are really loose and some of them are tight. So I always put it into fast forward so you don't have to see me painfully using my fingernails to get into those, splitting the yarn, etc. So here we are at the end. I have one back bump left, so now yarn over and insert into that back bump and pull up a loop. You can see the slip knot attached to it. Yarn over again and insert into that back bump again and pull up another loop. So in this way, we've created 4 stitches at both ends of our placemat, and that will make the semicircular ends. Now we have to introduce the return pass. So slide the stitches to the other end of the hook and flip the work around. Choose a lightly contrasting color for your color B and attach it to the work by wrapping it around the hook and pulling through 1 stitch on the hook. This is the only time on the return pass that you'll pull through 1. Every other time, yarn over, pull through 2 stitches on the hook. So yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And keep doing that until you get to the end. I usually leave around 2 stitches remaining on the hook, so 1 return pass stitch and 1 forward pass stitch remaining at the end. And here we are. So flip the work back around and take a look at what you have. This is the yarn tail and the slip knot of the beginning of our chain. That first chain we're going to skip. So identify the chain after that. Identify the 2 loops of the chain that we have left because we worked into the back bump on the other side. Insert the hook under both loops of that chain. Yarn over and pull up a loop. So we're going to do that exactly 30 times. So again, insert under both loops of the chain, pull up a loop, and work your way down the line. And here is where it is important to count because you want to make sure you have exactly 30. 29 on one side, 30 on the other. You do need an odd number of stitches here in order for honeycomb pattern to work out when you work it in the round. So once you've done it exactly 30 times, and do count 30, you kind of have to squeeze the last one in right at the end, flip the stitches around and work a return pass. Yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2, until you just have 2 stitches left on the hook. That way you can start the next semicircle fresh. Now look at what we have here. This part's a little tricky. Here we should be able to identify 4 Tunisian stitches that are vertical bars radiating out like spokes on a tire. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there in your contrasting color is the return pass chain. So hopefully you can identify those 4 stitches in your work as well. So we're going to start by working a simple stitch into the first one, which is right on the edge. So just go behind the front bar of that stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. That's a Tunisian simple stitch. Next, we're going to work a regular Tunisian increase by inserting the hook into the return pass chain. It doesn't matter exactly where, just anywhere within the return pass chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. So that's one increase done. Now we're going to do that 4 times. So work another simple stitch into the next vertical bar and then another increase. So use your fingernails if you need to insert the hook into that return pass chain and pull up a loop. Next, we're going to work the third simple stitch. Now this stitch is always very tight. It has a little purl bump at the base of it. That helps you know where you are in the work. This should be the third one of the semicircle. So work that and then insert a third time into the return pass chain. It's always a little tricky. Yarn over, pull up a loop. That's an increase. Now work your final Tunisian simple stitch into that fourth stitch, which is always big and loose, and then finish with your fourth increase into the return pass chain. So we've created 8 stitches which constitute our semicircle. Now it's time to work a return pass, and I'll just quickly show you this return pass. The stitches that were worked as increases look a little bit different than regular stitches, but they're just worked in the same way as always on the return pass. So yarn over and pull through 2 until you have 2 stitches remaining. Then flip the work back around, push it to the other end, and this is what you should have. The next part of the pattern is easy. We're just going to work down the straight side of the placemat. It is important to start with a Tunisian simple stitch. We're now going to start working in honeycomb stitch, so we're alternating 1 Tunisian simple stitch with 1 Tunisian purl stitch. If you don't know how to do the purl stitch, I have a video for that, which is painfully detailed and you'll be an expert. But basically, simple stitch and purl stitch, and do that pair of stitches 14 times. This does set up the honeycomb pattern for the rest of the project, so make sure you do it accurately and count 14 pairs. I'll zoom through a bit because that part is pretty straightforward. Once you get to the end of working those 14 pairs of honeycomb stitches, the pattern states to work a single simple stitch, and don't forget to do that. Then work the return pass so that you can start with a fresh slate on the semicircle. So just pull the return pass out of the way with your fingernails a little bit so that you can identify your 4 stitches once again. Here they are, the third one a little bit recessed, the fourth one, and there's the return pass chain. So this time we're going to start by working an increase. So insert into the return pass chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. Then work the first simple stitch of your semicircle, followed by another increase. Use your fingernails, get the hook in there, yarn over, pull up a loop. This is Tunisian simple stitch number 2. Another increase. I'm making it look harder than it is. Now you always know you're on the third one when it's this sort of shortened tight stitch with a purl bump at the base of it. So that's your Tunisian simple stitch number 3 of your semicircle. Have some trouble getting into that one. And then work your 4th increase into the return pass chain. Oy vey, get in there. And then the 4th one is usually nice and loose. If you have trouble getting all the way around because the stitches are too tight, work a return pass halfway through working that semicircle. Either way, when you finish the semicircle, definitely work a return pass before you try to tackle the straight side of the placemat. So here we are again, another straightforward section. We're just going to work in honeycomb stitch straight across, remembering to follow the pattern exactly by starting with a purl stitch. So purl, simple, and do that pair of stitches 15 times. Zoom through that a little bit. It's pretty straightforward. So once you've worked your 15 pairs, that should bring you to the end, and you can kind of tell that that's the last stitch of the round. For some reason, it ends up being a big loose stitch, and I always mark the last stitch of the round just to keep track of where I am for future rounds. Now we're ready to start round 3, and things are just going to keep getting easier. This row starts with a purl stitch. So bring the yarn forward and work a purl stitch into that very first sort of tight stitch there. Work a simple stitch next. In these early rounds, things on the semicircles are a little tight. You can see me struggling here, going off camera, bringing it back up. So work a simple stitch into the next stitch. I think the key here is just identifying what is a stitch and what is sort of the mess of the previous round. The next technique that we have to learn here is the honeycomb increase. Yarn over, insert the hook into the return pass chain as we've been doing, and pull up a loop. So that effectively creates 2 new stitches. Then the pattern states to do a purl, followed by a simple stitch, and then to repeat that twice. So another purl stitch and another simple stitch. At this point, you probably want to work some return pass stitches to loosen things up. Then the pattern says to work another honeycomb increase. So yarn over, insert into the return pass chain, and pull up a loop. So the honeycomb increase is just increasing by 2 stitches instead of 1 with the use of a yarn over. Now we're going to work down the straight side once again, starting with a purl stitch, and then a simple stitch, purl, simple, and repeat that pair a total of 16 times. And once you've repeated that 16 times, work a single purl stitch at the end. And here you can see I've done that. So now we're going to do another honeycomb increase, yarn over, and work a regular increase into the return pass chain. Then do a simple and a purl twice. So in other words, 4 stitches worked in honeycomb stitch, starting with a simple. So simple purl, and then simple purl again. And then work your final honeycomb increase, yarn over, and increase into the return pass chain. Work a return pass so that you can work the straight side of your placemat. Don't skip that first one because where we worked the increase there, it's very close to the hook. Don't skip over it, it's easy to do. And pay attention to the pattern. Start with a simple and then a purl. And work that pair of stitches 16 times. So as you're going along here, you can always continue to confirm that you're in the right place by noticing whether or not you're working a simple into a purl and vice versa. So look for those purl bumps and always make sure that when you see a purl bump at the base of a stitch, you're working a simple stitch into it. So here we are at the end. There's my final simple stitch and then a purl stitch into the marked stitch. Now here it's a little hard to tell which exact one the marked stitch is. So it's good that we counted 16 pairs of stitches there so we know. Now move the marker onto the stitch you just worked and it'll become more obvious as we go which the marked stitch is. So once you've worked the return pass, now you're ready to start round 4, which is really easy. We're just going to work evenly around in honeycomb stitch. You can see that stitch is a purl stitch, so we work a simple stitch into it, and then a purl stitch after that. And just keep alternating simple and purl. When you get to the increases from the round before, they look a little different, a little hard to work into. They're sort of recessed. And you're going to have to keep track in your head, purl, simple, so you know how to work those stitches, because they don't really look like simples or purls. They were just worked as increases. That's a purl, so work it as a simple stitch, purl stitch, simple, purl, and then we have our increases. So remember where you are. We just worked a purl, so now work that increase, which is a yarn over, as a simple stitch, followed by a purl stitch. So just keep alternating simples and purls and you won't get it wrong. But you do have to remember that those increased stitches don't really look proper, so they're not going to guide you as to whether you're working a simple or a purl. I've worked some return pass and I'm around the semicircle, so now just go down the straight edge again, keeping to your honeycomb pattern, alternating simple stitches and purl stitches. And that's all there is to it. Keep going around, working the return pass as often as you need to. I just want to show you approaching the marker. Here I think it's pretty obvious to identify which is the marked stitch. So work until you get to that stitch. Here we have a purl, and then the marked stitch is a purl, so work it as a simple stitch, and then you've worked the last stitch of the round. So you're finished round 4 and ready to start round 5. Now I do recommend moving the marker because if you work a few rounds, it gets a little bit harder to tell where the marked stitch is. And there's our next semicircle, ready to start round 5. So there are the hard parts of the pattern demonstrated, I hope. Here you can see all the different beautiful colorways and edging options that you can work with these placemats. I hope that helped, and thank you for watching.